Hi, I'm Irene Tansman, author of Baby and Arlene's Autism War. Today I'd like to talk to you about advocating for services for adults with severe autism. Today we have a special guest, Jill Escher, president and founder of the National Council on Severe Autism. In addition to her role at the NCSA, Jill is also the founder of the Escher Fund for Autism. This fund focuses on research on the genetic toxicology of autism and related neurodevelopmental pathologies. Jill is a council member of the Environmental Mutagenesis and Genomics Society, a board member and past president of the Autism Society, San Francisco Bay Area, and the owner of Clarendon Properties, which provides housing for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. She's the mother of 3 adult children, 2 of whom are diagnosed with autism. For those of you who would like to find out more about Jill Escher and the National Council on Severe Autism, I will place links in the YouTube description. Welcome, Jill, to my channel.
Thanks so much, Irene. Really appreciate it and happy to be here.
There are 2 ways to advocate for services for your loved one with severe autism. And maybe you can mention some other ways, Jill, if you can think of it. You can advocate directly for services specifically for your loved one by navigating the service delivery system for autism and intellectual disabilities in your state. And another way is to support organizations and grassroots efforts that will advocate for the entire community of disabled individuals with your loved one's condition. Jill, could you tell us what the NCSA is currently planning in terms of nationwide advocacy for those with severe autism?
Yeah, well, that's a timely question, Irene. So just to put this all into context, National Council on Severe Autism was co-founded by myself and several other parents and practitioners as well in 2019, and it's now 2022. We're in our, we're about 3.5 years old, so we're still relatively young. And one thing, we have several things that we work on, but one of our initiatives is something called the National Grassroots Network. And what we're trying to do is grow a network of, it's mostly parents, but other family members, professionals, caregivers, researchers who really care about this population, trying to grow a national network that's devoted to a certain policy agenda. You're like, well, what's the policy agenda?
Yeah, that's the next question.
Well, that's a good question. Well, we haven't actually published it yet because it's in the works. So for everybody listening to this, keep coming back to our website, ncsautism.org. And this is something that we will be publishing either in whole or bits and pieces, starting this fall. But none of these things will be a surprise to anybody. I think we're not pulling any rabbits out of the hat here. So, as we know, autism, but particularly severe autism, is an exceptionally expensive condition. It's expensive, it's difficult, it's exhausting, often exhausting. It's staff intensive, right? Which makes severe autism one of the hardest conditions to serve in the entire history of humanity. Those who have done financial modeling regarding costs of autism forecast just astronomical increases in costs, not just to families, but also to the taxpayers / systems, right, that support the adults. So advocacy in this space is not easy. It's not a one and done, like, oh, we want to build a bridge. It's over. No, this is advocacy for supports that are needed year after year after year in growing amounts for the foreseeable future. Because what we've seen is that autism rates have grown so dramatically. They've grown easily 30 to 40 fold over the past 35 years.
I want to tell you that I used to be one of the skeptics of the idea that autism is growing so much. But
Hmm.
in recent years, I've seen, I used to go out with my son and I would never see anybody else like him. But now, I see people like this all the time.
All the
And
time.
I'm not seeing people that, with other disabilities like blindness or anything else. I'm seeing a lot of autism out there.
And it's not just what you see, the data is clear. You can look at the special ed data. You can look at the CDC data. You can look at the Medicaid data. You can look at the Social Security data. You can look at the California Department of Developmental Services data. You can look at insurance claims data. No matter what data set you're looking at, you see the same curve. The data is there. And then people say, oh, well, we just didn't notice it before, but that's ridiculous because these people, for the most part, have such a level of impairment that they would have been diagnosed with something, if not autism. And there's no data to suggest that this population, existed before. How old is your son again, Irene?
My son is 34.
Yeah. So he's right on the very edge of that bubble. He is like, you can see very clearly from the California data, if not other databases, but California data is very clear that the autism bubble started with births in the mid 1980s, right? So these people are now,
Yeah.
in their mid 30s, or mid 35, 36, 37 years old. And that's, they're just the beginning, they're the cusp of it. And then after them, we saw rates increase 11% every year. We see that data from California DDS data. We see it also from New Jersey data, 11% every year, a steady increase with really no evidence for the explanation that that's, diagnostic shift, broadening diagnosis. There's a little bit of broadening diagnosis, but not much. If we're talking about autism as a disability, when we're comparing apples to apples over time, there's no evidence for
Yeah,
it.
so right now, the answers out there are we're going to cut the corners when it comes to severe disabilities. We're going to warehouse them. We're not going to provide what they really need. We're going to get rid of services, so the more the burden is on the parents.
Right.
That's the answer, is to cut the corners.
Yeah, right.
Can we afford to do what really needs to be done? Can we afford
That
to do
is
that? How?
that's the most important question, Irene. I mean, that's the most important question because this huge explosion in autism will bankrupt our Medicaid system. It's that big. And the costs are that dramatic. So what do we have to do? I mean, saying we can't do it isn't an answer, right? We have to do it. There has to be a way to provide services for this population because letting them, be neglected, abandoned, and dead is not an answer. The
Right.
only good
Yeah.
answer is what can we do to serve their lifespan needs in, an appropriate way, right? It
Right.
might not be the most luxurious way, might not be the absolute best way, but in an appropriate way. And we're not, I'm going to be honest, we're not having that discussion. One of the things that we're going to talk about in our policy document when it comes out is this absolute neglect of the necessity to forecast these needs over time. I mean, we have a sense of the data. We know that every single year we have a growing number by birth year of autism cases, but we aren't doing enough to say, well, what are the implications for services?
Yeah.
I can pencil it out and I can give you my guesstimate. And I can look at some published studies, but we're looking at $1 trillion a year in costs. $1
So
trillion a year. This is hardly trivial. It's really enormous.
So, as far as I can see, the NCSA is the only organization that's talking about this and other things that relate to severe autism. The other
So
organizations,
far,
the other organizations don't really, and I don't agree with you on everything down the line that the ends. I don't agree with, but at least we're talking about the same autism. You and I,
Yeah. Well,
we talk
listen,
about the same
welcome
autism.
to autism land where nobody
Right,
agree. There's no two people who agree on anything. I mean,
right,
this is a world of conflict. My best friend in the autism world was this woman, Feda Al-Malidi, who was one of our co-founders at NCSA. And she and I disagreed on so many things all the time. But but still, we were best of friends, the closest of collaborators. That's how it is in the autism world,
right.
So
But
there's
at least we're talking about the same
yeah,
autism.
we're talking about the same. We're not talking about the kids who go to college and graduate and get jobs and get married, and
Right,
God bless those people, more
right.
power to them. But that's not our population.
So a group of us, a group of parents, we went to talk to our federal representative. He didn't see us directly, but we spoke to his aide, and then his aide spoke to him, and then she came back with answers to our questions. And one question was, would you consider listening to the NCSA? Would you consider sitting down and talking to the NCSA? And he did not answer that question. So, how do you think that I and others could convince lawmakers to actually listen to the NCSA, which is the organization that represents our families? How can we do that?
Right. Well,
Or
in
should we do
building,
that?
yeah, I hear you, Irene. I mean, in building our national grassroots network, one of our goals, is to um, make sure that we have representatives in every congressional district in the country, right? So we have feet on the ground, ready and willing to talk to all of our, at least federal level elected representatives. Now, how that actually happens, how we get meetings, how we build relationships, how we build rapport, how we become a recognized and respected entity. Well, that's not going to happen overnight. There's no magic pill. I also want to say we feel that it's incredibly important that we don't do it alone. There are other organizations out there who are speaking out on behalf of this population, maybe not as strongly as we do. Maybe they only do it, in part from time to time, but our people do fall under their umbrella. So I want to make it clear that we're not operating in a vacuum. We actively speak with other advocacy organizations about our policy interests. But again, this is an evolving thing. This is something we're working on really as we speak. And that's what it's going to take. It's going to take just persistent effort on the part of people who have elected these people to office to speak to their needs and to listen to their stories. One thing that has been really terrible for the autism community, I think, has been the omnipresence of neurodiversity advocates trying very hard to dominate the conversation around autism. And again, I don't begrudge them their issues. I don't begrudge them their needs, their policy objectives, whatever they need, to improve their lives, I would be in favor of. The problem is they've tried to do it to the exclusion of other narratives. So, making sure that our narrative is a strong part of policymaking is a very important objective.
Now, I noticed that in the children's services, there's a lot of information out there on how to navigate it, on what the IDEA means and how it's implemented. It's easy to get educated on children's services and what you need to do to advocate for children's services. In the adult systems, we do have some laws regarding human dignity. The home and community-based settings rule, which people keep on saying, well, that means we can't be in an intentional community, which actually isn't
It doesn't.
true.
What I know, it's
That
not
isn't
true.
That actually has some good things in it. Things about choice and things about conflict of interest free service coordination
Yeah.
and person-centered planning. And we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, but we don't have too much help in interpreting this information and deciphering what it means for the population of severe autism. What do you
Yeah.
think it would be the best way to learn about these laws governing our systems and how to navigate these highly complex
Gosh, that's
systems?
such a great question, Irene. Really great. The IDEA is essentially a federal mandate that applies across all 50 states. And it has certain standards, substantive standards and procedural standards across all 50 states. And of course, we know at age 21, or in some states, like Michigan, age 26, you age out and you fall off the cliff, right, into the adult services system,
Right.
which is funded to a much lesser degree and is standardized to a much lesser degree. The way the Medicaid system works, and Medicaid is the bulk of our safety net. It's not the only safety net for adults with intellectual disabilities, but it's the bulk of it. They operate through the state Medicaid programs. And the state Medicaid programs essentially make their own rules. So we don't have a standard mandate. We don't have a standard entitlement. We have 50 different
Yep.
systems.
Yep.
And Lord knows I can't begin to wrap my head around all the differences. I mean, I talk to parents every day from different states, and they're
Yep.
telling me about whatever Department of Disability in their state. And it's like, it's all news to me. I don't have that level of knowledge, that encyclopedic level. So yeah, the problem is it differs state to state. Um, and some states have more robust offerings than others. Um, and like even here in California, where you would think it's very standard, well, we're broken down to all these different regional centers. We have 21 different regional centers, which basically are funnels, right, for the Medicaid plus state matching funds to come through the regional centers to be dispersed to vendors who support the children and adults with developmental disabilities. Even those regional centers operate quite differently from one another. So you say, oh, it's all standard in California. I'm like, no.
Do you think
No way. What's offered here might be very, very different from what's offered there. So yeah, it's super complex and differentiated.
a federal standard would be helpful?
I absolutely think so. Absolutely, 100% think that we need some sort of baseline of services that are available to these adults who cannot care for themselves, right? Who cannot earn a living, right? Who need what kind of amounts to 24/7 support, although some of them can be semi-independent some of the time. We need a baseline for them across all 50 states. We have this crazy system where it's set up to fail because
Yeah.
what state wants to attract more autistic adults to their borders?
That's right. That's the
None.
race to the bottom.
The race, it's
Yeah.
yeah, exactly what economists call the race to the bottom. Now, achieving that kind of baseline entitlement, though, would be, I think, a Herculean political feat that I don't know if we have the political will or even the leadership in the disability community to do that. I will say this about the disability rights advocates. They did make a run for full funding of HCBS to eliminate the wait lists that we see that are horrific in so many states. This isn't just to autism, this is for everybody, who
Right.
has an intellectual
Right.
or other disability who needs that level of support. And of course, that was a political, dead in the water, you know, approach. But I commend them for, for even trying. I don't think I would have had the chutzpah to try it. But yeah, so these are very, very big issues. I think that realistically, we have to look for the lower hanging fruit. We can't be too idealistic because the political, you know, achievability is too low. So we have to look for lower hanging fruit. What can we change that will make a material difference, right, in the lives of these adults, especially as their parents age and become less capable of caring for them. And that's part of what our policy process is looking at. What are the things that we really want to focus on? I mean, as I think, Irene, I think we could all spend thousands of hours advocating for stuff that will never materialize.
Right, right,
What autism parent has time for that? Like
right.
none of us. So how do we say, okay, what can we work on that is actually possible?
Okay.
So
I,
that's where
I,
we are. I don't have the short answer
yeah.
to that though, because this is again something we're working on.
So many individuals with severe autism receive services via the home and community-based waiver program.
Yeah.
The rules governing this program are supposed to assure that individuals receiving services and support have full access to the benefits of community living.
Right.
Yet, it is next to impossible to obtain the support services necessary for those with severe autism to be successful in the community. These support services include community-based instruction, instruction on augmentative communication devices, and quality behavioral services. It seems discriminatory and exclusionary not to provide these services to those with severe autism. And this is the rule that's already in place that CMS put in place. So what do you think is the best path to advocating for these services, for these types of services, which in my opinion should come along with the home and community-based waiver?
Well, again, another home run kind of question here. The problem with the HCBS system, and the HCBS system, in principle, it is a good thing. It's meant to allow people to remain in their homes and in their communities without having to rely on an institutional setting and supports. And the idea is, well, we provide them, day programs, we provide them in-home supports, overnight supports, we provide behavioral supports, like you said, we provide different things to kind of prop them up in the community. Well, the problem is HCBS providers, by and large, and I'm sure there are exceptions here and there, but by and large, they can choose their clients.
Yep.
And they do not choose adults with severe autism for the most part, because they're too challenging. Like they might choose someone like my daughter, who's like easy as pie. I mean, she's nonverbal, but no behavior, sweet as pie, go along, get along. But they certainly don't choose, adults like my son, who's 23 and has kind of nonstop challenging behaviors. In fact, that is what happened. There was not a single supported living provider here in the Bay Area that would accept my son as a client. So on paper, my son had HCBS services, but in reality, he didn't, because the agencies rejected him. And this is something we hear from every single state. So
Yes.
and you called it discrimination.
Yes.
And I want to say it's discrimination. I don't blame the agencies. I want to make that clear. I don't think it's the agency's fault. They have their reasons for choosing the clients they choose. But there is a systemic discrimination in that the systems don't require, right, that this population be served as part of HCBS. That is a major failing of the system and something that absolutely needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. Well, this has been a very informative discussion. I think it's going to make a great video for our viewers. Thank you so much for appearing on my channel. I'd like to have you back another time.
Thanks,
And I'd like to
Irene.
thank my audience for watching. And thank you, Jill Escher, for being on my channel.
All right. Thanks, Irene. Have a great day.
You too.